to go on to the next presentation. This time it is from Esther Bron. She's an assistant professor at the Erasmus Medical Center from the neuroimaging, and she will tell us about can AI help in diagnosing in real patients. I give the floor to Esther.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope my microphone works. Yes, so with the light on designing with diversity, I want to take you to the difference between research data and whether AI actually works for real patients. So starting with a bit about my field of research, which is radiology. I work here at Erasmus MC for the radiology department, and we're interested in medical imaging, in my case mostly medical brain imaging, and developing methods, AI methods to extract quantitative measurements describing the function and the structure of the brain. And not only that, but also using artificial intelligence, machine learning to, based on these measurements, based on the images, make a diagnosis or do some future predictions of future outcomes in the patient. So that's the background, developing AI based on imaging. And this is, in this field, a lot of research on machine learning is happening. Many methods are being developed, but these methods are not finding their way yet to real clinical practice. They're not helping mostly real patients, real doctors with the problems. And that's something I want to dive into you with today. And I want to start that with an example from the pandemic. So 2 years ago, start of the pandemic, first data sets of COVID patients, CT scans became available. Many AI researchers jumped on top of that to develop diagnosis and prediction methods. And then later that year, a review was published, Wijnands et al., and this popular news article was written, title, "Hundreds of AI tools have been developed to catch COVID, none of them works." And so to show a bit what happened there, so a few quotes from that paper is one example. The AI was trained on patients with, on CT scans of patients with COVID, but of course to train the method for diagnosis they also needed some controls, so they took some CT scans of healthy people that were available, but those turned out to be kids, and the AI worked very perfectly of course on this training data, but learned something different than the target. Another example from that paper is predicting the risk of COVID from the scan, but as more severely ill patients were more likely to be scanned in a laying down position. So the position is a good predictor for the severity of the disease. But this is of course not what we're interested in. And one of their conclusions was that many tools were either developed by AI researchers who didn't maybe notice those biases going on, or were developed by medical researchers that maybe knew it but had no idea how to solve that. So these were two quite extreme examples. I think in most cases were more subtle. And the main biases of the main problems here could be summarized by the prevalence of the data used to train the AI methods not being representative of those of the target population. So being undersampled or oversampled patients compared to the hospital situation where you would apply it. The controls not being representative, so I showed two examples of that. And the inclusion or the exclusion criteria of the patients being not representative. And so this might be an extreme case, as beginning of the pandemic there was like high pressure on getting the first papers out as quickly as possible. But maybe this might be exemplar for the big of the field. So I would like to take this to my field of research, to dementia. So worldwide, 50 million people are living with dementia. The majority of those patients has Alzheimer's disease. And diagnosis, early diagnosis, is still a problem in this disease, because the disease is so complicated, many factors being involved, many symptoms, many ways the multiple diseases underlying dementia can develop. So on average it takes a couple of years before a first diagnosis is being made. And this diagnosis is important for giving the right care to the right patients in the right time, and also for research into development of new medications, so that we have at an early phase accurate diagnosis. So how machine learning methods are being trained here, mostly based on imaging data, so where we can measure like how the brain shrinks, to say it simply. And that imaging data is often combined with like clinical data from cognitive testing or lab tests to make a diagnosis or to predict a future outcome of dementia. And this is a very big research field. It really took off from 2008 onwards with those two papers, and that coincides with much more data becoming available. So then a large multi-center study, the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative multi-center study started, and many papers, I think like 70% of papers on this research is just on that one data set. So yeah, and the performances are quite high actually. So on average an accuracy of 90% to separate Alzheimer's patients from controls. But how would this perform on real clinical data? So APNI, as I said, that's used a lot. And I recently did a research project to look into how those methods trained on this large APNI data would perform on the Parelsnoer data, so data of our Dutch university medical centers. And that was the first time that that data set was used for that purpose. So these are results from that study, a lot of different comparisons. So in the circles is the main message. So on the left in the background is the validation result on APNI data, and then in the middle we have the result on Parelsnoer. And actually we were happy or surprised to see there is a drop in performance, but it was not so big as we expected. And one of the reasons, the major thing maybe explaining this drop, is the difference in patients, whereas in APNI there is healthy controls as the reference examples. In clinical practice you would never have a completely healthy normal person entering your memory clinic, but it would also always be people that have some cognitive complaints, which are in the Parelsnoer dataset, but still not a very shocking drop in performance. And I just told you that in this field there are over 1,000 publications on this topic, but still recently with my master's student we looked into papers that did an external validation, and we could only find 10 papers. So yeah, that already is quite shocking. That I think it's coming more, so all these papers are relatively recent, but external validation is very limitedly done. But the drop in there is some drop in performance on average, but it's not that shocking. But still, I think most of these claims for COVID, they're in some way present in dementia research as well. So still as I said, most research is being done on a couple of dominant data sets that are mostly case control and have another prevalence as the memory clinic. Mostly it's done on healthy controls, which may be good for training, but for testing and validation, we would like to see how it performs in a real memory clinic. And regarding inclusion and exclusion criteria, I think there's also a mismatch about the research data that we use for training and development of that methods and where they are being applied. So age is a confounder of dementia. At a higher age, you have a bigger risk for dementia. Also so dementia does happen in a younger age, and then diagnosis is more difficult because it's maybe often it can be confused with like a burnout or psychiatric symptoms, for example. And age also differs per cohort, per population, as different hospitals. So older people are most often diagnosed by a GP, by a general practitioner, while younger people are more likely to go to university medical center. And also regarding comorbidities, there's another disease that you have in addition or next to your dementia, for example, that differs per population. So people with comorbidities are less likely to be in a research data set, but they are likely to be in a memory clinic, for example. And because research studies, they may exclude people with comorbidities. And I have one illustration of that, and that is a vascular comorbidity, which is very common. You can see it on the scan on the right. There's these white dots in the middle of the brain. Those are white matter hyperintensities, which are a sign of small vessel disease. And in our research data set, so the APNI, there's many patients. Most of the cohort has no to very little of those white matter hyperintensities. Well, in the Sunnybrook dementia cohort, so a memory clinic population, this comorbidity is a lot larger. So to summarize, what my opinion is that technology is there. There are so many methods published. Most of them work, but what we need is real validation and a collaboration between medical researchers and technology, AI researchers, and we need the representative data of clinical memory clinic data to take account of bias and to set the next step here. Thank you for your attention.
Well, again, a very impressive presentation, Esther. I think you show here that it's not a small problem, that it actually reveals how we've been creating a paper reality in healthcare somehow. A paper reality, I mean, with that we've created a reality that is not as it is in real life. And I think a lot of doctors would agree that what's been written in trials and what's been written, of course, has a solid base, but it often does not fit reality on the working floor. I think your data showed that as well and makes it more visible than ever before. How do you think we can solve this? What should we do? What kind of data, and how could we get the right data to get this to work? Have you had any idea on how to approach it?
Yeah, so it is not going to be easy on an organizational and a legal and a level, but the data, we are collecting the data of patients, so we need to collaborate and work on a way to be able to use that data that we are collecting every day in clinical practice, to be able to use that for research. We can do that, but I think that needs more effort. And maybe bring AI, so AI researchers would like a data set that's available for them to download. But we need, so it should be a requirement for AI researchers to make an effort to also validate on real clinical data, or that should be that should get more attention. Yes, so we should build infrastructures able to bring the methods to those clinical data, as clinical data often cannot leave the hospital. Yeah.
Actually plea for a research group working also together in creating a kind of platform where you have open data for open science.
Yes.
Where everybody could extract data from. I know with Omics data that they already use it. I'm not sure if that's...
Yeah, so I think that's one good thing, but I think the data of the clinical data, I think making that open data, that's probably not going to be possible. So there we need to revert it the other way around, make a platform that can bring the methods to the data and leave the data where they are. Yeah, but still a platform.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of work still to do.
Yeah.
I have some room for questions. Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the dementia, because I found in the recent years, the research is still mostly focused on the physical design. It's not from the mental design. So I'm wondering, so these diagnosed images is from the mental side or still the physical side? And also just assume we can design some new things based on these diagnosed images. Is that we can just evaluate from the mental side or just, yeah, this can really be useful for our patients. Because for the people who got the Alzheimer or the dementia, they cannot really know this design is for me. We can only evaluate from their family or some others. So
I didn't completely get the first difference that you say. Is that medical or physical?
Oh yeah, I just mean like the most design is focused on the physical use. It's not from the mental perspective. Because for the people who got the Alzheimer, maybe their mental age is quite young. We cannot really know their thoughts or some other things. So I'm wondering our design, this diagonized images is still relevant to the physical design or the mental design. I mean, we consider about their both physical condition and the mental condition, or only physical condition, or just mental.
Okay, yeah, so so the images, of course, measure the physical aspect, so the structure of the brain, and in some way we can also measure function of the brain with MRI, so not with the structural image that I showed, but we can measure like blood flow to the brain and those more functional aspects. But the mental part, so this imaging is just one part of the diagnosis and one part of input to AI. There are cognitive testing and behavioral scores. So it will be combined. It will be multimodal. We need. So that's also how currently diagnosis is done in multidisciplinary. So imaging is part of it, but we also need input on the mental part of it. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
One other question. One other question? Yes.
Okay. Thank you. It's a very insightful presentation. Thank you. And I have like similar questions like girls just asked. It's more like, because recently I also do a small research about the AI-enabled system, how the cardiologist can trust it, or how the patients can trust this kind of AI-enabled system. So I'm not sure about right now for the AI system for medical industry. It's more like from the beginning to the end is kind of systems the medical doctors can interrupt it and get the results directly, or the systems right now doctor can kind of like enter some symptoms by themselves, and it can change the AI system to diagnose the patient's situation. I mean, I'm just curious what kind of situations right now for AI-enabled system in medical industry.
In industry, so I don't know really about cardiology that you were referring to. But for neurology, so the domain I'm working in, none of these real multidisciplinary AI methods, machine learning methods that combine like high dimensional data from images, they are not yet used in the clinic. So quantification is making their way in the clinic, so helping radiologists to more precisely or more quantitatively measure like the volume of a brain structure. So AI on that part is making their way into the clinic, but these fully integrating diagnostic systems, they are not yet.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Thank you, Esther, for your very, very nice presentation.
Thank you.